So Greece has a few hundred islands, and there are all of them are beautiful. This is one of the most beautiful. Okay, we are all lucky to be here. I'll talk to you about something that I've been thinking for the last 8 years. How does this happen? Okay, what happens right now, which is this is language, okay? But I mean, in general, how does do neurons and synapses work together to create complex behavior? Unfortunately, this we don't know. We don't know the answer for even for this critter, a half millimeter long blind worm, whose name in Latin is elegant empty walking stick. So we know it has only 300 neurons, and still we don't understand how it moves. Okay, so let's look at something that is 1,000 times more complex, and that's the fruit fly. Okay, and I'm going to show you a little part of how the fruit fly's brain works. Now we know much more about it, but a few years ago, that was the most sophisticated thing we knew about the fruit fly. How the fruit fly remembers smells, okay? So we have a similar system for remembering smells, but amazingly similar, even though it was discovered independently. But I mean, for the fruit fly, here's what happens. It recognizes 50 different smells, okay? And for each of these smells, it has a particular receptor, the little circles on the left. And at its point of time, when it smells something, this excites to different degree these 50 receptors. And the excitation of these receptors is projected to the projection neurons in the middle, 50 of them. And then something very interesting happens. There is a random bipartite graph of synapses between the 50 and the 2,000 cells of the mushroom body of the fly. They're called canyon cells. And so what happens is these 50 numbers, you can think of it as a vector with 50 coordinates, is multiplied by a random 50 by 2,000 matrix. Okay, and you get these outputs. And then something even more sophisticated happens. You select the 100 winners, the highest 100 numbers out of the 250 numbers, or out of the 2,000 numbers in this long vector. This is done by a trick that is used also in our brain, and it's called inhibition. Okay, that we have one inhibited inhibitory neuron. It's called APL. It's one of the largest neurons, the most powerful neurons in the fly. And what it does, when it senses that the canyon cells are going wild, what it does, it's sort of, it's the firefighter. It says, calm down, okay? It can't be that important, right? I mean, so basically, it increases the membrane potential, and as a result, very few fire, okay? But maybe that's too much, okay? So in the beginning, too much were firing out too few, okay? Because there are too few, APL comes down. And now so what happens now is an exponentially damped oscillation, okay? And in the end, what you get is that only the 100 most powerful neurons fire. Okay, so, in some sense, this optimization, right? This optimization, thank you for reminding me. And binary search, okay? So, by doing binary search, it finds the 100 neurons that are the 100 largest numbers of the vector, okay? it's a very interesting primitive form of optimization. And this is something that is very important in the brain. It's, many of you study the brain, but I don't think that this is something that has been studied. To my mind, is one of the most important operations that happen in the brain. It's called random, we call it random projection and cap. Okay, you realize what I mean? That you have some configuration, you project it randomly across a random bipartite graph, and then you take the highest components of the resulting configuration. Okay? And this is the fundamental operation. But I mean, why do I call it random projection and cap? How do I know? How do I know that this is a random bipartite graph, right? And the amazing thing is that I know. Okay, how do I know? A few years back, somebody basically figured out the precise transcriptome of the fly. Okay, the precise connectome of the fly, and this is the adjacency matrix of the random bipartite graph. And they put it through a lot of all kinds of statistical tests. And the bottom line is that yes, it is a random bipartite graph. Okay, so which sort of makes you think. This must be very important if this little insect has a random number generator in its genome. Okay, I mean, so randomness must be very important in life. Okay, so all right. So let's talk about something closer to us. Okay, I just want to point out something that is obvious, but we don't think about it all the time. But what happens right now is a very profound mystery. What I mean is that what I'm doing right now is I produce air waves in our space. And these air waves through your ear, your drum, your cochlea, your auditory cortex, finally become words, okay? So this sequence of words in your brain become a hierarchical structure, a tree, okay, which is sentences, stories, narratives, talks. And if I'm very lucky, you are going to remember this, you're never going to forget it. Okay? How this happens is light years beyond what neuroscience can explain. Right? Okay, this is too much. Okay, so but we are happy to have an interesting glimpse of this, and this is what I'm going to concentrate on. Basically, we have a lot of sure. Thanks. We have a lot of very clever experiments, right? And I'm going to show you one. What they did in this experiment by David Purple, who's a cognitive scientist at NYU, they recorded from hundreds and perhaps hundreds of patients in 6 different languages. And what they did is they presented to them a recording, sound, which was words in their languages, single syllable words in sequence, and given in at 4 every second, at 4 hertz, right? So basically, it would be something like this. They would hear something like this. And then what they did is they took all this data and they took it through the phonic spectrum, through Fourier transform, and not surprised, there's a huge component at 4 hertz, okay? Because 4 times every second, these subjects had to sort of identify this word and perhaps try to understand what it means and if it fits with other words. Okay? So this was repeated time after time, and hence this spectrum. And then they did something very clever. They repeated the experiment, except that every 4 words made sense. And this went on for half hour. And guess what happened? There are now 3 peaks. Okay, there is the 4 peak because this was happening also, but then there is a peak at 2 hertz. Why? At 1 hertz. Why? Because once every second, this subject, what we were doing is they were identifying a sentence. Okay, this was a well-formed sentence. And also at 2 hertz. Why? Because these sentences are balanced. Okay, like bad cats eat fish. Okay, and so twice every second they would identify a phrase. All right. I mean, this is incredible, right? I mean, so the way I think of it, this is what was happening. Okay, that these people that were creating trees in their brain. Okay? Soon after I heard a talk by David Papa on this experiment, I was having lunch with Chris Manning, who is a famous computational linguist from Stanford. And you know, in the middle of the lunch, you know, so you know, I left my fork down. I looked at him in the eye and asked something very weird. Okay, I told him something like, "For the love of God, Chris, do we have trees in our brain?" Okay, and Chris Manning thought for a while, and then he told me, "Yeah, I think we have trees in our brain." And I had chosen Manning for a reason, because of all the linguists I know, this would be one of the least, most reluctant to admit that we have trees in our brain. Okay, so you know, to go along with Chomsky. This shook me profoundly. I mean, because now we are mathematicians. We have an amazing mathematical engineering problem. Okay, if we create trees in our brain at 4 hertz, okay, this means that every layer of this tree should be created in parallel time, in parallel frequency, you know, in 12 parallel steps. Why 12? Because here where this happens, in our left hemisphere, in the medial temporal lobe and surrounding brain areas, this happens, you know, the frequency of the neurons that spike there is 50 hertz. Okay, and if 4 hertz is the input, and you must react to this input to create trees at this speed, this means that every 12 parallel steps we must create. Okay, so here is the puzzle for you. Okay, can you visualize dynamical systems of neurons, neurons and synapses? Okay, just plain neurons and synapses, because there is nothing else in here. Okay, all of this is done by neurons and synapses. There is no doubt about it. You know, I really believe that there is no metaphysical intervention, okay, for us to understand that. So it's the neurons and synapses alone, because that's all we have. And the question is, can you visualize a dynamical system of neurons and synapses connected? You know, so that if they receive an input that excites part of these neurons, and this input is speech, is language, they are going to be able to create trees at this speed, one layer of the tree every 12 spikes. Is clear? So that's the challenge. I hope you realize that that's a difficult problem. Okay, so, you know, it's not so easy to. It's not, you know, it's a difficult thing to. Spoiler alert. We saw it. I'm going to give you. You know, I'm not going to show you a simulation that we did, but it will do exactly this. Okay. Here is another experiment that changed my way of thinking. The subjects read, this time it is visioning. The ball hit the track versus the track hit the ball, and in these 2 sentences, a different area of the medial temporal lobe, or the superior temporal gyrus, or Wernicke's area, we wish, was recorded to be excited by the word track. Okay, so this is very interesting. That apparently our brain has a different place for object and a different place for subject, and probably a different place for verb. Okay. All right. So this is, we're mathematicians. This is a similarly impossible problem, okay? So what do? We generalize it, okay? So let's look at the real problem, okay? Which is the title. How does our mind come from the brain, okay? And the point is that there are very clever people studying neurons and synapses. There are very clever people studying cognition. And these are the typical, very famous books in these two areas. And there's a huge gap, not only in scale, okay, the scale being sort of 10 to the 11, not this 10 to the 11 gap, but also a huge gap in point of view, methodology, experimental animals, and so on. Okay, so there is essentially a very difficult to bridge gap. And Richard Axel, who is my hero in this business, Nobel Prize 2006, he put it in an amazingly elegant way. We do not have a logic for the transformation of neural activity into thought. And you discerning this logic as the most important future direction in neuroscience. When I read this, okay, I felt that I was blessed by the ecumenical thought pattern. Okay, so I felt that my hero was approving what I was doing, because this is a problem that I've been working on for a few years. I find there are two surprises here. Okay? One surprise is that Axel, who is one of the most dedicated empirical scientists, okay, he's an amazing experimentalist. Okay, he's one of the great living experimentalists in science. That Axel uses the word logic in what he's looking for. Okay, which logic, to my mind, means, and I hope to yours, means a formal system which ultimately is computational. Okay? The second surprise, frankly, is that only I and my friends are working on this problem. We have a theory, and we don't have competition. Okay, so which is I doubt it. I mean, so logic for Axel. I'm a little exaggerated. Logic for Axel formally means a way that will convince me that somebody has understood something. Okay, logic means it in a more informal way than I got it. Okay. Cool. So, and this is the question. Okay, what kind of computational system would qualify as logic? You can ask this question in a different way. Where does computation happen in the brain? Okay, I was giving a talk like that 2 years ago at Duke, and after the talk, a retired professor of neuroscience, they have a very good neuroscience group, came by and asked me, what makes you think that there is computation in the brain? Okay, so and I didn't give him a good answer, but now I know what answer I should have given. Okay? And that's the following, that I believe strongly that there is computation in the brain. Because if there is no computation in the brain, I will never understand how the brain works. Okay? So, so this is not like a scientific hypothesis or an ideological dogma. It is a methodological assumption. Okay, so let's assume that it's a computer, and maybe we know computers enough now that we'll eventually understand how it works. Okay, good. So, certainly molecules compute, and you know that in the brain. And certainly spiking neurons and synapses continues, and circuits of spiking neurons and synapses. And the smart neuroscientists will tell you that the real computation doesn't happen in neurons and synapses, but happens in the dendrites, the input device. Okay? Because very strange things happen, and we know that. So you started to understand that better and better. And then cognitive scientists will tell you that computation happens in the whole brain because they do experiments, and then the computational cognitive neuroscientists will tell you, you see, for all you know, the subject's brain was executing the following program, and they give you a 4-line program. So that seems to explain what the experimental results. And the question is that there is a huge gap in between. And this gap, I'm going to show you how to bridge this talk. We believe that one way to bridge this gap is to consider populations of neurons that got memories. These are called assemblies or ensembles. In fact, we have discovered a few operations on them that create a calculus that we call the assembly calculus. For some reason, we didn't call it the assembly language. So, the point what I want to convince you is that it's really a bridging framework, a computational framework, because we show that these assemblies of neurons and operations can be implemented. These operations can be implemented by spiking neurons and synapses, and we also show that can implement cognitive phenomena. Okay, so and this is the story I'm going to tell you. Okay, is this okay? Any questions? If you don't know about assemblies of neurons, okay, one thing that I want to tell you is that when I started thinking about them 7 years ago, there were some neuroscientists that would tell me, really, I know that some people think they exist, but do you think they exist? Now they are old news, okay? And almost everybody, believes that this is very important, that ensembles of neurons are a very important part of what happens. Right? In the old days, for those of you who remember what happened in the 70s and 80s, neuroscientists would tell us that there is something called the grandmother neuron, right? And the grandmother neuron means it's a neuron, every time it spikes, we remember our grandmother and vice versa, okay? And by the 80s and 90s and zeros, we had been wisened up, okay? So, and we knew that was impossible. If there was one grandmother neuron, then there will be no grandmother, because every neuron in our brain has maybe a few tens of thousands of incoming other neurons. And therefore, if a single neuron cannot affect any other neuron to do anything in the brain, okay, so you really need to have a lot of grandmother neurons, except now we call them Jennifer Aniston neurons, okay, because that, we discovered them. What's the experiment discovered that Jennifer Aniston neurons? We have been suspecting even before that, so in the 90s, that they existed, but essentially they recorded from a few hundred neurons in somebody's brain, and then they show a few hundred photographs, and the subject recognized that they should know about, okay, so the brother, the Acropolis, the pyramids, the mother, and so on. So and they got one hit with Jennifer Aniston, okay. So and then back of their calculation, we chose 100 out of perhaps 20 million neurons, and we showed 200 photographs, and we got a hit. What does it mean? It means that there was not one Jennifer Aniston neuron, but at least 30,000 Jennifer. So, okay. And by the way, after this talk, you are going to have not just Jennifer Aniston neurons, but Jennifer Aniston neurons. Okay? But don't go this way. Okay. So, assemblies were already conjectured by Hebb 70-something years ago in his in his book that founded computational neuroscience, cognitive neuroscience, and for more than 5 decades, neuroscientists were looking for them, but they didn't have enough sophisticated enough recording technology to identify them reliably. Okay, so and this changed the beginning of the 21st century, and now not only they see them, they know them, they control them, they fire them, but also they can create them. So so assemblies are sort of Busaki, who is one of the leading neuroscientists today, calls them the alphabet of the brain. Okay? For those computer science among you who are old enough to remember the pseudo dilemma, symbolic or sub-symbolic computation, to my mind, intelligence rather than computation, to my mind, assemblies is where the two meet, okay? Where sub-symbolic computation, which is individual neurons, get together, they create symbols. Okay? All right. And it's now dated, but this is a paper where we explained our theory of the assembly calculus, the assembly hypothesis. Okay, the assembly hypothesis says that there is an intermediate level of brain computation, and it's implicated in the higher cognitive functions, reasoning, planning, language, storytelling, math, art, and so on. And assemblies of neurons are its basic representation, its data types, okay? And what are its operations? I'll show you one operation, and so the others are not very important, are not for this talk. So you start to, imagine that you have in a particular brain region the blue set of neurons that is an assembly, okay? And then there is another area, and there is synaptic connectivity from A to B. Okay. In other words, there are a lot of neurons. There is a fiber between A and B. Okay. There are a lot of neurons, a lot of synapses going from A to B. And in fact, of course, A and B also have recurrent synapses. Okay. There is a random graph in A, a random graph in B. And now imagine that that the assembly X in A fires a dozen times. Okay. What will happen? You can sort of simulate it in your brain what will happen. Or it's a dynamical system. What will happen is that if you assume, if you believe my story with the random projection cap, that's exactly what will happen. A new set of neurons will be selected in area B to fire. Okay? But now things will change because this is not a fly, this is a human brain. And what will happen is that there are recurrent connections from B back to B, from X back to itself and to the other neurons of B. And as a result, the next firing of A, there will be a different set of neurons that will be selected in B to fire, and the next is slightly different, and after a dozen steps, it's going to converge. Okay, so a stable copy X prime will emerge in B. All right. And that's the projection operation. And in fact, from now on, if X fires, X prime will follow suit. Of course, for a little while, okay? Because years later, maybe these synaptic connections will be forgotten and X prime no longer will exist. But during our experiment, this will be true. And the question is, how do we know? So we know in many ways. We have mathematical proofs, we have simulations on idealized models, and we have simulations on neurorealistic models. Okay? And this means that and so we have three modes of supporting of proof to support this claim. So, but let me show you quickly the definition of the dynamical system that I believe is not many talks have a slide like that, okay, mathematical model. And so I will describe to you a very simple dynamical system, which I believe captures the essentials of what brain computation is all about. And so imagine a finite number of brain regions, okay? Brodmann thought there were 90 of them, so 100 of them or something, so maybe a few hundred, right? And each contains n neurons. For simplicity, suppose that each contains the same number of neurons, say 10 million of excitatory neurons. And inhibition, because each one of them has an inhibitory population of neurons that will not let it fire too much, through the same oscillatory behavior that we saw in the flag. Only K will fire. in that. Okay, so out of the 10 million neurons, only 1,000 neurons will fire at any point, or 10,000. Okay, something. And some pairs of areas are connected by fibers, which are random graphs like GNP graphs, etc. by. And all areas are connected recurrently by a real GNP graph. Okay, GNP meaning you know that. And nodes, and each one of them independently has, each pair of them has a directed edge independently with probability P. Connections between areas can be inhibited and disinhibited. In other words, they are controlled by other inhibitory neurons. And plasticity, very important, means that if I fires and the next step J fires, and there is a connection between I and J, the weight of this synapse, of this edge, is going to increase, let's say, by 5%. Okay, that's Hebbian plasticity. And that's the whole model. Okay, and these are the intended parameters, and the main ideas are randomness, selection, and plasticity. If you think about it, these are the three forces of life. Okay? You know, so the three main important forces of life. So I mean, this is I believe a very assemblies are not an axiom of this system, okay, of this logic. Okay, assemblies are an emerging behavior of this logic. You see what I'm saying? No, so this system, if you let it loose, it's going to create assemblies. Okay. So I mean, in some sense, this is very much like the chip. Okay, think of the computer chip, right? I mean, so it is itself a very messy dynamical system of intertwined lattices of atoms and floating electrons, right? But I mean, what is its saving grace? That it has a family of attractors that we call chips, that we call bits. Okay, and this family of attractors is the one that allows us to do computation. Okay? The same happens in the brain. All right. And for example, I mean, we have been proving and improving with my collaborator Santos Bentala, who is going to be in Greece in a few days, that the projection operators converges exponentially fast with high probability. So every theorem that we prove for this model says with high probability. What is the underlying probability distribution? The creation of the graph. Okay, so you know it's the GNP. Basically we have some sort of there is even a threshold phenomenon of how fast it converges, and simulations show that a dozen steps are enough with the typical parameters that we're interested. Okay, so you can project within a dozen steps. So I mean, projection is an important operation. This is how assemblies are born, by projection from the sensory cortex. In other words, we see things, they're projected to the hippocampus, and our project, this is not this is somebody else's gimmick, not mine. Okay, so they're projected in our hippocampus, and from there they're projected to other areas, and they start having an interesting life of their own. Okay? Eventually they enact brain phenomena. So what I'm again reiterating is that the assembly operations are real, okay, in the following sense. They correspond to behaviors of assemblies that have been observed in experiments or can explain experiments. And we know that they're implemented by neurons and synapses because we have proofs, we have simulations in our model, and we have simulations in much more neuralistic models. How powerful is the system? You know, the bottom line is it's Turing complete. You can prove that with it, you can simulate n over k. You remember the two parameters of the model, space computation. n over k, let's say it's at least 100. And if you think about it, n over k space computation is anything you can do in 100 logical parallel steps. And 100 logical parallel steps, I think, is an extremely powerful thing. I mean, in other words, I don't think that we can, any of us can carry out in one go 100 logical. And so it's a very powerful brain computer. All right. The challenge now is to convince you that not only this computational layer in the middle of the brain hierarchy can be implemented by lower levels, by neuron synapses, therefore by molecules, but it can help implement cognitive functions. Okay, so for this reason, I'm returning to language, right, which is how I started. And basically, we have, we knew this, we forget the lexicon. But we knew about Broca's area and Wernicke's area for the past century and a half. But our understanding of these areas has been changing. Now we know that Broca's area that Wernicke's area is involved in word meaning and word selection in sentences. And Broca's area is related to syntax and the structure of language and sentences. And in fact, there is an amazing book by Angela Frederici, who is a famous German cognitive, I guess, neuroscientist and also linguistic neuroscientist, who wrote this great book, sort of summarizing the experimental results that are known and understanding that is emerging from these results, circa 2017. And the emergent understanding is the following: that once we hear the words, when your brain hears the words that I'm saying, what happens is that these brains hit the lexicon, which is in your left, in your right-handed left medial temporal lobe, the purple area. And in there, you have probably about 100,000 assemblies, each one of which represents a word. And every time you hear this word, this assembly fires. Okay. Then, Friederici's book says, there is activity in Wernicke's area where the selection takes place, and where the roads define, and also further down, further below in the green area, where some computation seems to be taking place, and the role of the words into the sentence is being determined. And finally, again, Friederici's book, once this is done, the results of this computation, in other words, the structure of the tree of the sentence that was computed seems to be created in Broca's area in the frontal lobe. So this is sort of a lot of very liberal explanation of a lot of experimental results. Okay? And then Friederici's book seems to be stuck. Okay. And if there's a famous paragraph in page 134 where Friederici says, I hypothesize language mirror cells. Because she says, okay, this activity is happening, okay, between these three areas, and maybe a few more. But the question is, how do these areas communicate? Okay, how do the neurons in these areas communicate to sort of, to basically, so that computation can progress. And basically, because the only such phenomenon that we knew so far is the mirror cells that have in our body. So, every time I raise my hand, your cell, your mirror cells for hand raising are activated. Okay, she says, that I hypothesize language mirror cells. Okay, I read this and I thought, oh my God. Here is an author who is praying for a sentence. And I wrote to her. I sent her our paper. It was just a few months old at that point, and she wrote to me an enthusiastic letter saying, "Yes, this is what I've been looking for." And since then, we have written a paper explaining why assemblies are what is needed to explain language. And so, I'm going to finish my talk by showing you an experiment of that. Okay? It's, frankly, I was all my career, I was obsessed by proofs. I was reading clever proofs, and then I wake up at night thinking, how did they think of this? How did they find this? And now I'm equally obsessed with experiments. Like the Popper experiment, or the Frank and Greenberg experiment, or the experiments that Federici is describing. How are we thinking of this? That these experiments that sort of that shine light on scientific truth. So we did an experiment of our own, and we wrote a parser of English in these operations that I told you, essentially by projection, that works by projection, by neuron projection. Okay. So I'm going to describe to you what I was describing in the beginning of my talk. I'm going to describe for you a dynamical system consisting of neurons and synapses, so that some of these neurons have some populations that have learned to respond to words, okay? And if a sequence of words comes in, these populations are going to be excited in a sequence, and this will drive a dynamical system to finally create a tree that understands the meaning of the sentence. So this one I'm going to describe. Any questions? So here is what the architecture looks like, and in fact, the architecture is heavily influenced by what we know about language. And basically, it's the following: that there is a brain area called lex, and in this brain area we have lots. As I told you, 100,000 is the number that is being mentioned there. Often in the literature, 100,000 assemblies, one for each language, wording of language. Okay, so if your language has cases like German and Greek, then for every case, sort of form or plural form of every noun. Okay, and the same for verbs. I mean, I think that 100 language is a very, very, very conservative number. In any event, you have these cell populations, so 100,000 cell populations, each one containing tens of thousands of neurons. Obviously, these are going to intersect heavily, right? I mean, and we're going to see that they use this intersection well. And so that's lex. Then you have Wernicke's area, which we hypothesize is subdivided into sub-areas. One for object, one for subject, one for verb, one for preposition, one for determinant, and so on. Okay? So that's adjective, adverb, and so on. For the parts of speech, okay? Plus syntactic roles, subject. In other words, nouns are a special part of speech, which means that they can be the subjects or object, or sometimes propositional nouns, okay? And so on. All right, so this is our, and then there are fibers, okay? So basically, it's known that around the superior temporal gyrus, there are a lot of neural fibers that are evolutionarily novel. In other words, they didn't exist in the chimpanzee. Okay, so, and I conjecture that these are the ones that connect these areas. Okay. And we assume that every word assembly, every assembly encoding a word has an action set. Okay, this is like a piece of a program, which basically says inhibit fiber 1 and disinhibit fiber 2. Okay, so it's only inhibit and disinhibit commands. It inhibits individual fibers. And a very simple program. Okay, so that doesn't need to be longer than three words, than 3 lines. And this little program encodes the part of speech of the word. Okay, if it's verb, it's different, has a different program, little program than when it's a noun. If it's a transitive verb, it's even more difficult. So when a word assembly fires, its action set is executed. And if you think of the total, the union, the sum total of all these action sets, I think that a fair word for this is the grammar of the language. Okay? So people who speak Chinese, people who speak English, who speak Swahili, they have different, their nouns, and verbs and so on. They have different action sets associated with them. So this is a dynamical system with about 10 million neurons. 10 million neurons and a few trillions of synapses. Okay, and this is what we are simulating every time, on various words. Imagine that the input is cats chase dogs. Okay, and this is in some sense, this is a finite state automaton. You can think of it. And this is its state right now. Only the fiber from legs to subject is disinhibited. Everything else is inhibited. Why is the fiber from legs to subject disinhibited? Because this is English, and the parser knows that it's very likely to see the subject before the verb and verb. Okay? Other words, other language, so ancient Greek is different, Hebrew is different, and so on. Okay, so this is how it starts, and now chase comes. Cats arrives. The word cats is heard, and as a result, the assembly associated with cats, one of the 100,000 that exist in this subject's legs, fires about a dozen, maybe 20 times. Okay. And what happens if notice that they have this fiber going to subject, and as a result, as we have seen, a copy of these cats prime is going to appear on the subject. Okay. And going back a little, so the action sets are complicated. Okay. They're not just a set of neurons. Okay, they have a structure. All assemblies have a structure. They have semantic neurons. Among them, there are plural neurons. Okay, to inform that this is the plural form of a noun. And they have the action neurons, which tell you that this is a noun. And the phonetic neurons, how to articulate the word cats if you want to. How to recognize the word cats if you hear it, and so on. So they have all these kinds of neurons. And what I was telling you is that these neurons are now going to create a temporary copy in the subject area of the language organ. And then we're done with cats, and now chase comes. Chase is a verb, and as a result, part of its action set is to disinhibit the fiber from legs to verb, and also from subject to verb, because this is English, and if you see a verb, this means the subject is already in place in the subject area. And then, of course, chase creates a copy in the verb area, as predicted by the assembly calculus, and then while exiting, it closes the door behind it. it inhibits again this fiber. And now all the object comes, dogs. It is, since the legs to object part, fiber is disinhibited, it will project itself to the right place, and then we are done. Okay, and we are ready to parse the next sentence. So it's fair for you to ask, what kind of experiment is this? How do you know that the sentence was parsed? Okay, so here is the secret: that all this has left after the input cats chase dogs, if you see the period, or you hear the period that the sentence is on, the synaptic weight connections between assemblies form a valid dependency trees, the parts of the graph. Okay, this is something that can retrieve, right? I mean, so it leaves behind some retrievable side effects, retrievable in assembly calculus actually, side effects which tell you, yeah, the subject has understood this sentence. What is the object? What is the subject? What's the verb? And we can do quite a bit more complicated sentences than this. So the parser, okay, what is it? I want to insist, okay, it is a dynamical system, okay? It's not, right? It is implemented exclusively through the spiking of stylization. There are no variables, no conditionals, no loops, nothing, okay, no subroutine. Okay? It's just spiking neurons. Okay? That achieves it. There are like 200 kinds of aphasia, and we sort of understand how they are connected.
There's one way.
Right. So sort of understand. You mean generation, or okay? So so there is the most famous ones. The ones first discovered were Broca's aphasia and Derrick's aphasia. And we have our understanding of the effect of these has changed over the decades, over the centuries. But there are literally hundreds of different aphaisias, corresponding to lesions in our language organ. I'm not sure I understand what you mean by direction.
For example, you destroy the semantic center. Because here you put words, they make a sentence, they make a meaning.
Yeah.
How does this?
Then we are so now you. I misunderstood your question. You are asking a very important question. How does Okay, you are convinced that I can do syntax, okay? Okay, and then you say yes, but cats chase dogs. Okay, so there's also cats love dogs. There is cats hate dogs, or how do I get the meaning? How do I see how does the cat chase dogs have the intended meaning, which I hope happens in all your brains now, which is a cat running after a dog who is fearfully running away. Okay, so how does this come about? Okay, excellent question. Okay, so I'm not talking about this. We are not doing this in this experiment, but we know how to do it. Okay. So, all right. So there are many parsers right now. So published parsers actually in the same journal, and all of them are much better than this parser. What this parser has which is special is this. Okay. So if you don't understand this, so you're not in a good position to understand why we did it. Okay. Do you have any questions about this? Okay. Okay. So, actually you can play with this parser online. Okay, the code is available, and we just presented 2 weeks ago. We presented this in the annual conference of the Association of Computational Linguistics, and it's also published in its journal. So we can parse sentences like this: a young couple next door saw the old white car of the main suspect. So this parser will parse it. And it does it in about 0.3 seconds. Okay, so in other words, per word. When you translate the speed of this parser into human speed, knowing how fast neurons in this area spike, this will give you something like the rhythm with which I'm speaking right now. With more work, you can do sentence embedding. We have done that. A very interesting problem is listening. Okay, so how do you well, I'm assuming that every word has one action set. In other words, it has one particular role in the sentence. But the word rock in English can be a noun, can be a transitive verb, and can be an intransitive verb. Okay? So, in some sense, every word does not have an action set, but has a distribution of action sets. Okay? And basically, it's a probabilistic grammar, and so on. So, we know how to implement this. We assume that if you run it on a corpus of already parsed sentences, so you can train a deep net to do the right thing. So but we have not done. Okay, so that's something that we plan to do. Police ambiguity, and by ambiguity backtracking. So a sentence starts, and then you say, "Oops, what I thought was the verb of the sentence was not the verb of the sentence," and so on. So that's. How do you do all this? This is more generally called grammaticality. How does the brain know that what they have heard is a grammatical sentence, which is one of the most mysterious and powerful things you can do in language. And we have a simple Russian parser, okay? So that, which is completely different. It has a completely different structure than the one I told you, but it parses Russian sentences, okay? It's a little more toy than the English parser. I have, how am I doing with time? So I think I'll skip this. It brings you back to context-free languages in Chomsky. In any event, what I want to point out, I'm finishing, this is my concluding remarks. This experiment, the parser experiment, was one of the main messages of my talk. What I want to point out of the experiment is that it enables you, it entitles you, it gives you the right to ask questions that before you had no right to ask. Basically, this question, is this the neural basis of language? And if any of you are linguists, this is a sacred question. So you are not supposed to ask. There would be cries of blasphemy, in a linguistics conference. Okay? But we ran this experiment, okay? So could it be that this is, maybe we're so lucky and this precisely is the neural basis of language, okay? And once you sort of start imagining that, the next thing you ask, how do babies populate it, okay? And that's, how, in other words, we assume here, our parser assumes an adult language organ, where the actions, the words have been learned, and each one has learned its action set, okay? How is this done? Okay, this is a huge problem. This is the most amazing problem. But in any event, we also do. We are also working on biologically possible language acquisition. The input, we want a system a dynamical system whose input is the modest amounts of grounded baby intended speech. In other words, what we get from our mothers. Grounded means that it's not just speech, but things are happening. Okay, so while they hear the word ball, the baby is raising a ball. Okay, so in their hand and they're looking at it. Okay, so that's what grounded means. And the output is a functioning language organ, lex, parser, generator. Okay, so this is what we are working on now. Okay, there are many other things that we're doing on assemblies. With Santos Vempala, we have a paper called sort of answer the question of how do assemblies learn and predict. We have a paper where we solve by assemblies the how's it called, the blocks world problem, right? In other words, you are given, you see a set of configuration of blocks, you think of the target configuration of blocks, and you want your brain to output robotic commands which transform the first block to the first configuration, the second configuration. Right? So it's the planning problem in which, okay? And we have done this. We have a paper on this. And so here is the bottom line. I have, as Panos was very kind to say in the introduction, in my many years as a computer scientist, I have looked at many areas and many other problems, economics, evolution, AI, networks, and so on. But nothing compares in how difficult it is. Okay, this is the steepest slope I've ever planned, and how satisfying it is, how fascinating. And to me, assemblies, and we'll keep arguing, is a good candidate for what Axel wants to see in his logic. And we'll keep making experiments like this that bring us close to profound questions, especially in the field of linguistics. So, final question: how do you further argue that assemblies are the seat of access logic? We have we have collaborations with experimental cognitive scientists at CUNY, University of New York, where we are trying to do exactly this, or to find evidence that assemblies are indeed what goes on when cognitive phenomena happen in the human brain. And these are my collaborators. Santosh Vempala is a famous theoretician at Georgia Tech. Mike Collins is a great computational linguist, used to be my colleague at Columbia now, Google. And Damir Tropolsky is my graduate student at Columbia, who will graduate next year. And with this, thank you very much.
Before, which included many parts, including a parse that you implemented using spiking neurons and cell assemblies. Is that right? Yeah. So I can send you it. But that's not the question. So just a comment. Well, actually, Chris Hyde, he works with cell assemblies. I was just a investigator. What would you 2007, 6, 2008. I think we did one project finish.
Oh, well, at least I wouldn't.
He recently had a paper about basically review of sources. But we also had the learning rules and HKI in 2007 conference. Anyway, that's it. Yeah, I'm not doing this anymore. One question which interests me, and I wonder what's your opinion on that. So every organ in the body has a function. Heart pumps blood, lungs oxygenate blood, and so on. So what's your opinion? What's the function of the brain? And I think it's a key to understanding how it works. If we understand the function, then we will also understand how it works. And then related to this, it's a question in cognitive science. I know I don't think there is an answer, but I wonder what's your opinion. Do you think neurons are necessary for the implementation of the brain, or they're just sufficient? Maybe there are.
Okay, to start with the last, I'm pretty sure that you and I would no doubt sit down and some motivation. you are asking me if there's intelligence in Android.
Yes.
Then, absolutely not. The neuron was a very compelling. It was a very clear winner. Everybody voted it, so not the reality, but slightly. So, function of the brain. What's the function of the brain? I'm not exaggerating. Okay, so if you ask, if people were saying, actually, you're saying, what is the brain of man? Is there an optimization framework? I think this is wrong. Okay, so the brain is optimizing dopamine. This is what you are all doing. That's what I meant.
Thank you very much for this exciting talk. I have a triple layer of questions, so I'll try to keep it tight. Number one.
By the way, I'm not going to be around for
It is one question. Do you think that the linear structure of the sentences we construct poses a problem to our 2D thinking? I think, as I understood correctly. If so, can we construct sentences that are harder understood than others? And if that is the case, can you make a study where you phrase sentences with the same meaning but a different structure in order to prove that we have a free thinking by measuring the neuron activity? So are there sentences where there are less neurons active that transport the same meaning? Just thinking of cats chase dogs. Dogs are chased by cats.
Yeah.
Same meaning, different structure.
Yeah. This is the wonderful question. I think I'm not going to answer this factor now, but I'll tell you something about the last part. But I forgot to tell you the experiment I started with. The ball was hit by the truck. The brain, understands that, says, never mind the passive voice thing. The stupid thing of passive voice. So the ball is the object. Hit by the truck. So when it discovers object, by placing the right place, it discovers the deep object. So, definitely sort of phrasing. Language I get from your question sort of one important sort of scientific question, which is how can you demonstrate that language is indeed free? Okay, so that's tree structure, as you know, is the quintessential choices. But the only thing you need for language is an operation called balance, which allows you to take two things, create a third thing, nothing else. So you have this, but he thinks that trees are necessary, and in fact not ternary trees, but binary. So this is
yes, question. The assemblies are enough of the dynamic system, that's my understanding.
The assemblies are sets of neurons and samples, which sort of they are dense, they are stable, and they call it.
but they come as an optimizer, let's say, of an energy function, the dynamic system.
They do, yes.
What would be this energy function? Because your calculus, your assembly calculus.
Yeah, so I don't know the answer to the question. That's good. What I know is that the dynamical systems that I described are these as an important last one. So, yeah. So according to fundamental theorem of dynamical systems, this means that there is a Jacobian function.
Oh, there is, yes. That was my next question.
Yeah,
there is a.
Yeah, so there is this is important term. Any
Another final question, general question. Do you think that your approach might explore the problem of consciousness, which is of course not metaphysical?
Yes. I assume so. Any model that can explain how the brain works should explain also. That's the truth. I have a little problem trying to understand exactly what the students of consciousness. Yes, and so I have avoided I'm teaching every year in the brain, and every year my students beg me his consciousness, and every year I promise them more and more. Don't pass me for that, pass me for the problem.
Okay, last question.
Three questions. So, I think we are really talking about the negative side. So, let's say the science can figure out how brain works. And are you worried about the fact that might damage the fundamental basis for human thinking? It can be used for mind control.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. So that's an important question. Every time you ask a question of science, this gentleman reminds us very appropriately that one should think about its consequences. So, and the question was, what if our understanding of how the brain works, if we finally understand how the brain works, brings very negative aspects like that. Has crossed my mind. I believe that as an individual should worry about it. I don't believe that it should slow down its efforts. But indeed, we should all be responsible scientists who together make sure that the question you are raising, this of course goes for every science. Thanks a lot.
I think we should stop here. We should have a short break. Maybe a little break. We can ask some questions. Let us thank the
Jetzt schon geben soll? Oder später? Ja, später.
Doch jetzt.
All sorts of questions.